1 year after my husband's death, I hired a company to renovate his old office. I had just arrived at the church when the contractor called me and said, "Ma'am, I need you to come see what we found. But don't come alone. Bring your 2 sons." My heart nearly stopped when we arrived. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The phone call came during the closing hymn. I should have silenced it before the service began, but at 63 years old, I still sometimes forgot these small courtesies of modern life. The vibration against my palm felt insistent, urgent. I glanced down at the screen. Morgan, renovation. My stomach tightened. Morgan Holbrook never called unless something was wrong. I slipped from the pew as quietly as I could manage, my joints protesting after an hour of sitting. The late September air outside St. Cy. Andrews felt crisp against my face as I pressed the phone to my ear. "Mrs. Golding, I'm sorry to interrupt your Sunday," Morgan began, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "But we've found something in your husband's office. Something you need to see immediately." "What kind of something?" I asked, wrapping my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. There was a pause. When he spoke again, his words were measured, careful. "I can't explain it over the phone. But ma'am, I need you to bring your sons with you. Both of them. Don't come alone." The line went dead. I stood there on the church steps, staring at my phone as the bells began to toll. Don't come alone. What could possibly require both Michael and Dale to be present? What could a contractor find that would necessitate such a warning? My hands trembled as I dialed Michael's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice heavy with the lazy contentment of a Sunday morning. "Mom, I'm in the middle of breakfast with Claire and the kids. Michael, I need you at the house. Now." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Bring Dale." "What's wrong?" "The renovation crew found something. The contractor says we all need to be there." I heard him cover the phone, muffled conversation in the background. Claire's voice rose sharply. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. Irritation. Inconvenience. "Mom, can't this wait until—" "He said not to come alone, Michael. He said to bring both of you." Another pause. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook Falls, Virginia, my mind racing through possibilities. Thomas had been gone for a year now, one full rotation of seasons without his steady presence beside me. The heart attack had been sudden, merciless. One moment he'd been working in his study, preparing for a deposition. The next, he was gone. His office had remained untouched since that January morning. I couldn't bring myself to enter it, to face the absence that filled every corner of that room. But 3 weeks ago, on what would have been our 42nd anniversary, I'd made a decision. I would transform that space into something new. Not erase Thomas. I could never do that. But create something forward-looking. A library, perhaps. A place where our grandchildren could read. The renovation had begun 5 days ago. They'd started with the bookshelves, carefully removing Thomas's law volumes and boxing them for storage. Then the carpet, the old wallpaper. Morgan had promised it would take 3 weeks, maybe 4. They'd been scheduled to open up the wall behind Thomas's desk today. Something about updating the electrical wiring before installing the new built-in shelving. As I turned onto Hawthorne Drive, I saw both my sons' cars already parked in the driveway. Michael's sleek BMW sat next to Dale's more modest Honda. They stood together near the front porch, and even from a distance, I could see the tension in their postures. They'd barely spoken to each other since Thomas's funeral. Some argument over the estate that I'd tried desperately to stay out of. "Mom," Michael called as I climbed out of my car. He strode toward me, all business in his pressed slacks and polo shirt. At 41, he'd inherited his father's sharp features and sharper mind. "What's this about?" "I don't know any more than you do," I said, fishing my keys from my purse. Dale hung back, hands shoved in the pockets of his worn jeans. At 37, he'd always been the gentler of my 2 boys, more interested in his high school teaching position than in following his father and brother into law. But there was something guarded in his expression now, something watchful. The front door opened before I could use my key. Morgan stood in the doorway, his face pale beneath his tan. Sawdust clung to his flannel shirt. "Mrs. Golding, Thank you for coming so quickly. His eyes darted to my sons. Both of you. What did you find? Michael demanded, already moving past him into the house. Morgan looked at me and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Pity. And underneath it, something else. Fear. It's better if you see it yourselves, he said quietly. We followed him through the familiar hallway to Thomas's study. The room looked strange, violated. Stripped of carpet and wallpaper, the bones of the house exposed. Two of Morgan's crew stood near the far wall, their faces carefully neutral. The wall behind where Thomas's desk had stood for 2 decades was gone. Not just opened, completely removed. In its place was a space I'd never known existed. A hidden room. It was small, perhaps 8 feet by 10, lit now by work lights that Morgan's crew had brought in. The walls were bare drywall, never painted, and along those walls were shelves, dozens of them, filled with files. The wall was false, Morgan explained, his voice tight. Double-layered. We found the seam when we were checking for studs. There's a door mechanism here. He pointed to what looked like an innocuous section of bookshelf, hidden behind the trim work. Your husband built this years ago by the look of it. Professional job. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The files were labeled, organized with the same meticulous care Thomas had brought to everything in his professional life. I recognized his handwriting on the tabs, but it was the contents that made my breath catch. Photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, and names. So many names, written in Thomas's precise script across manila folders. Michael pushed past me, grabbing one of the files. His face went white as he opened it. What the hell is this? He breathed. I pulled another file from the shelf at random. Inside were photographs of a man I didn't recognize, copies of financial documents, what looked like surveillance notes dated over a decade ago. At the top of the page, in Thomas's handwriting, subject, Richard Pemberton, status, terminated, terminated. My hands shook as I set the file down and reached for another, and another. Each one contained a dossier on someone, most of them people I'd never heard of, but some names I recognized. Local business owners, a former mayor, the superintendent of schools. Mom. Dale's voice was strangled. He stood in the corner of the hidden room, holding a file that bore no name on the tab. Just a date. June 1998. He opened it, and photographs spilled out onto the floor. I bent to gather them, and my world tilted on its axis. The photos showed a young woman, beautiful, dark-haired, entering and leaving a hotel. In some of them, she was with a man. Not just any man. My husband. There were receipts, hotel bills, restaurant charges, all dated across a span of 6 months in 1998. The year Michael had graduated from college. The year we'd celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary with a party at the country club. The year Thomas had told me he was traveling constantly for a case in Richmond. There's more, Morgan said quietly. He pointed to the back of the hidden room, where a small safe was embedded in the wall. We haven't opened it. We didn't think we should. Michael was already across the room, examining the safe. It's a digital lock, 4 digits. Mom, do you know Dad's codes? I couldn't speak, couldn't think. The photographs felt like weights in my hands. Who was this woman? Why had Thomas kept these records hidden for over 2 decades? And more terrifyingly, what else had my husband been hiding? Try the anniversary, Dale suggested, his voice hollow. Michael punched in numbers. The safe beeped and clicked open. Inside was a single leather-bound journal and a stack of VHS tapes, each labeled with dates spanning back 30 years. But it was what sat on top that made Michael step backward, his face ashen. A handgun. And beneath it, a passport with Thomas's photo, but a different name. Mom, Michael said slowly, turning to face me. What kind of law was Dad really practicing? I looked around the hidden room, at the files covering the walls, at the evidence of a life I'd never known my husband had lived. Thomas Golding, the man who'd kissed me goodbye every morning, who'd sat across from me at dinner every night for 4 decades, who'd held my hand through 2 pregnancies and 1,000 ordinary days, had been a stranger with secrets that someone had wanted to keep buried. Because as Morgan had led us through the house, I'd noticed something. Small things that might have meant nothing individually, but together formed a pattern. The scratches around the front door lock that hadn't been there last week. The faint smell of cigarette smoke in the hallway, though no one in my family smoked. The way the alarm code had failed to work when I'd arrived 3 days ago. I'd assumed it was a glitch. But now, standing in this hidden room filled with evidence of Thomas's secret life, I understood. Someone else knew about this room. Someone who'd been searching for something. And they might be searching still. "We need to call the police," Dale said. But Michael shook his head, his lawyer's mind already working. "And tell them what? That Dad had a hidden room? That's not illegal. The gun probably is. Virginia requires registration. But that's not exactly—" "Michael." I cut him off, my voice firmer than I felt. "Look at these files. Really look at them. What do you see?" He pulled another folder from the shelf at random, opened it. His eyes scanned the contents, and I watched comprehension dawn. "These are blackmail files," he whispered. I nodded slowly. "And if your father was keeping them, if he'd hidden them this carefully for this long, there's a reason." "What reason?" Dale demanded. "What could possibly justify—" The sound of footsteps on the porch stopped him mid-sentence. We all froze. A knock at the door, sharp, authoritative. Morgan moved to the window, peered out, and went even paler. "There's a sheriff's cruiser in your driveway." My heart stopped. "I didn't call them." "Neither did we," Michael said. Another knock, more insistent. A voice called through the door. "Mrs. Golding, this is Deputy Marshal Garrett. I need to speak with you about your husband's estate." Deputy Marshal. Not local police? Federal. I looked at my sons, saw my own fear reflected in their faces. Whatever Thomas had been involved in, whatever secrets he'd kept hidden behind that false wall, they'd just found us. And I had no idea what we'd done to put ourselves in danger, or how to protect my family from what was coming. The marshal knocked again, waiting. Time seemed to freeze in that hidden room, surrounded by evidence of a life I'd never known, holding photographs of my husband with another woman, while a federal officer stood at my door asking questions I had no answers for. I took a deep breath and started toward the hallway. Behind me, Michael grabbed my arm. "Mom, wait. We need to think about this." But I'd already made my decision. Whatever Thomas had done, whatever he'd been hiding, I would face it. I'd spent a year grieving a man I thought I knew. Now it was time to discover who he'd really been, even if the truth destroyed everything I'd believed about my life. Deputy Marshal Robert Garrett was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 50, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He stood on my porch with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to waiting, his badge displayed prominently on his belt. "Mrs. Golding, I apologize for the Sunday intrusion," he said, his Virginia drawl softening the formality. "I'm following up on some irregularities related to your late husband's estate filing. May I come in?" Behind me, I felt Michael tense. Dale had gone silent. Morgan and his crew were still in the house, witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. My voice sounded remarkably calm, considering my heart was attempting to break through my ribcage. "Though I'm not sure what irregularities you're referring to. Everything was handled by my husband's law partner, Edward Hutchins." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes at the mention of Edward's name. "Yes, ma'am. That's actually part of what I need to discuss with you." He followed me into the living room, noting the renovation chaos with a sweep of his gaze. His eyes lingered on the open doorway to Thomas's study, and I saw recognition there. He knew about the hidden room, or suspected. "Marshal!" Michael stepped forward, extending his hand with the practiced ease of a corporate attorney. "I'm Michael Golding, Mrs. Golding's eldest son. Perhaps you could explain the nature of this visit?" Garrett shook his hand, assessed him with a glance. "I'm investigating potential financial crimes related to several estates managed by the Golding and Hutchins law firm over the past 15 years. The words fell like stones into still water. "My father's firm?" Michael's voice sharpened. "That's impossible. Golding and Hutchins has an impeccable reputation." "Had," Garrett corrected quietly. "Edward Hutchins disappeared 3 days ago. Cleaned out the firm's trust accounts. approximately $2.3 million, and vanished. We've issued a federal warrant. The room spun. I gripped the arm of the sofa to steady myself. Edward Hutchins had been Thomas's partner for 30 years. He'd been a pallbearer at the funeral. He'd helped me navigate the estate paperwork, had assured me everything was in order. When you say disappeared, Dale asked slowly, do you mean... I mean his wife came home Thursday evening to find his clothes gone, his computer wiped, and a note saying he was sorry. Garrett pulled out a small notebook. Mrs. Golding, when did you last speak with Mr. Hutchins? I struggled to remember. 3 weeks ago, when I signed the papers to authorize this renovation. He came here to the house. Did he seem agitated? Worried? I thought back to that afternoon. Edward had been his usual self, professional, sympathetic, perhaps a bit distracted. But there had been something. He asked about Thomas's office, whether I'd found anything unusual among his papers. Garrett's eyes sharpened. And had you? Michael shot me a warning glance, but I was tired of secrets, tired of lies. No, I hadn't been in the office since Thomas died, not until the renovation began. It was technically true. I hadn't found anything. The contractors had. Mrs. Golding, I need to ask you something directly. Garrett leaned forward, his expression grave. Did you know your husband maintained files on various individuals? Personal information? Financial records? The kind of documentation that might be considered blackmail material? Michael interrupted coldly. Marshall, I think before my mother answers any more questions, we should establish whether she needs legal representation. I'm not investigating your mother, Garrett said, but I am investigating what your father and Edward Hutchins were doing with those files, and why Hutchins ran the moment he heard about this renovation. The pieces clicked together in my mind with terrible clarity. He knew about the hidden room. We believe so, yes. We also believe he was afraid of what might be found there. Garrett stood, walked to the window overlooking the backyard. Mrs. Golding, your husband was a brilliant attorney. He also kept meticulous records of information that certain people would prefer stayed buried. We think Hutchins was helping him manage that information. And when your husband died, someone else wanted those files. I finished. Garrett nodded. We think Edward was being pressured, possibly threatened. And rather than face what was coming, he took the money and ran. Leaving my mother to face the consequences, Michael said bitterly. Leaving all of us to face them, Dale corrected. He'd been quiet until now, but his face was ashen. If Dad was blackmailing people, we don't know that's what he was doing, I said sharply. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they rang hollow. What else could those files be? Garrett turned back to face us. I need to see that room. Whatever your husband was hiding, it may be evidence in a federal investigation, and it may also help us locate Edward Hutchins before... He stopped. Before what? I demanded. Before whoever he's running from catches up to him. A chill ran down my spine. You think he's in danger? I think everyone connected to those files is in danger, Mrs. Golding, including you. The weight of his words settled over the room like a shroud. Morgan appeared in the doorway, his face uncertain. Ma'am, should my crew leave? Yes, Garrett said before I could answer. I'll need this to be an official scene. No unauthorized personnel. As Morgan and his crew filed out, I watched my peaceful Sunday morning transform into something from a nightmare. Federal investigation, missing partner, hidden files, danger. And underneath it all, the nagging question, who had Thomas really been? After Morgan left, Garrett spent 2 hours in the hidden room, photographing everything, making notes, occasionally asking questions I couldn't answer. Who were these people? When did Thomas compile these files? Did I recognize any of the names? I recognized 3. Lawrence Brennan, who'd served as mayor of Millbrook Falls 10 years ago. Rita Vance, principal of the high school where Dale taught. And Sheriff Raymond Cook, who'd recently retired after 30 years of service. All 3 had been friends, people we'd socialized with, shared meals with, celebrated holidays alongside. All 3 had files documenting secrets that could destroy them. Mom, you need to see this. Dale stood in the doorway of the hidden room, holding the leather journal we'd found in the safe. His hands trembled slightly. It's Dad's handwriting. It's a ledger. Garrett took the journal, flipped through pages filled with Thomas's precise script. Dates, names, amounts, payments received, services rendered, the clinical language of transactions. Your father was running a protection service, Garrett said finally. People paid him to keep their secrets. Substantial amounts based on these figures. That's not possible, I whispered. But I was staring at entries dated across decades. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. All meticulously recorded. Michael snatched the journal from Garrett's hands, his face flushed with anger. This doesn't prove anything. These could be legitimate legal fees. For cases that were never filed with the court. Garrett's voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Golding, I've already cross-referenced some of these names with public records. Your father wasn't representing these people in legal matters. He was collecting money to keep quiet about information he'd gathered. Then he was a criminal, Michael said flatly. Or he was protecting people, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. What if these weren't victims? What if they came to him, asked for help, and he managed the situation? Garrett studied me with new interest. An interesting perspective, Mrs. Golding. Is that what you believe? I didn't know what I believed anymore. But I knew Thomas. Knew the man who'd donated to the hospital fundraiser every year, who'd mentored young lawyers, who'd held me when my mother died and told me everything would be all right. That man couldn't have been a simple blackmailer. Could he? I believe my husband was complicated, I said carefully. And I believe there's more to this story than we understand. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. Stop looking. Some secrets should stay buried. I showed it to Garrett, watched his expression harden. When did you receive this? Just now. He pulled out his own phone, made a call. I need a trace on a number and a security detail at 428 Hawthorne Drive. Priority 1. Security detail. The words made it real. We were in danger. Not theoretical future danger, but immediate, present threat. Marshall, I said slowly, if someone knows we found this room, knows we're looking through these files, why warn us to stop? Why not just take what they want? Garrett finished. Because they don't know what you've found yet. They're trying to scare you into walking away before you discover something specific. Discover what? Dale demanded. That's what we need to figure out. Garrett closed the journal carefully. Mrs. Golding, I'm going to need you and your sons to come to the federal building tomorrow morning. We'll need complete statements, and we need to secure these files before... The sound of shattering glass cut him off. We all froze as a brick crashed through the living room window, wrapped in paper. Garrett had his weapon drawn before the brick stopped rolling. Everyone down! Away from the windows! Michael pushed me behind the sofa. Dale crouched beside us. Through the broken window, I heard an engine roar to life, tires squealing as a vehicle fled down Hawthorne Drive. Garrett spoke rapidly into his radio, calling for backup, issuing descriptions I couldn't process through the ringing in my ears. When he was satisfied the threat had passed, he retrieved the brick with gloved hands, unwrapped the paper carefully. What does it say? I asked. His face was grim. It's a list of names. 23 of them. He looked at me. Including your sons. And you. The paper fluttered in his hand as he held it up. At the bottom, scrawled in red marker, everyone who knows pays the price. We're taking you into protective custody, Garrett said. All 3 of you, right now. Wait. I stood, ignoring Michael's protests. I need something from the hidden room first. Mrs. Golding, 1 minute, please. Garrett hesitated, then nodded. Make it fast. I walked into Thomas's gutted office, into that secret room that had upended everything I thought I knew. The files lined the walls, so many lives documented, so many secrets preserved. But I wasn't looking at the files. I was looking at the VHS tapes. The dates on them spanned decades, but one caught my eye. September 15th, 1987. The day we'd moved into this house. The day Thomas had insisted on setting up his office first, before even unpacking the kitchen. The day he'd worked late into the night, alone, building this room. I grabbed 3 tapes, that one, and 2 others dated around significant events in our marriage. Events where Thomas had been distant, preoccupied, secretive. "Mom, we need to go," Michael called from the hallway. I slipped the tapes into my cardigan pockets and returned to find my sons being ushered toward the door by federal agents who'd arrived with remarkable speed. As I stepped out into the cool September afternoon, I looked back at my house. The home where I'd raised my children, where I'd built a life with a man I thought I knew. Someone had threatened my family. Someone wanted these secrets to stay buried badly enough to hurl a brick through my window. But they'd made a mistake. They'd assumed I would run, would hide, would let federal agents take over while I trembled in fear. They didn't know that I'd spent 40 years married to a man who kept secrets. I'd learned a few things about patience, about observation, about waiting for the right moment to act. And I'd learned that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. The 63-year-old widow, the grieving wife, the confused, helpless woman who needed protection. Let them think that. Let them believe I was fragile, overwhelmed, out of my depth. While they watched the shield, they wouldn't see the sword. I climbed into the back of the federal vehicle, the VHS tapes heavy in my pockets, and began to plan. The federal safe house was a nondescript ranch in Fairfax County, 40 minutes from Millbrook Falls. Beige siding, brown shutters, a lawn that needed mowing, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second glance. Perfect camouflage for people who needed to disappear. "You'll stay here until we assess the threat level," Garrett explained as he ushered us inside. The interior was as generic as the exterior. Standard government-issue furniture, bare walls, the faint smell of industrial cleaner. "We've got agents posted outside. No one gets in or out without authorization." Michael immediately began making calls to his office, his wife, anyone who would listen to his complaints about the disruption to his schedule. Dale sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, his face still pale from shock. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out the VHS tapes. 3 cassettes, 3 different eras of our marriage, but no way to watch them. I doubted the safe house came equipped with a VCR. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Mom?" Dale's voice uncertain. "You okay?" I slipped the tapes back into my pockets and opened the door. "I'm fine, sweetheart." He studied me with concern that made my heart ache. Of my 2 sons, Dale had always been the more perceptive, the one who noticed when something was wrong. "This is insane. All of it. Dad couldn't have been what they're saying he was." "I know." I squeezed his hand. "But we need to understand what really happened before we can defend him. The files, Mom. All those people. What if they're coming after us because—" He stopped, struggled with the words. What if Dad hurt people? What if he ruined lives? It was the question I'd been avoiding. Then we deal with the truth, whatever it is. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Thomas had been many things. But cruel? Destructive? I couldn't reconcile that with the man who'd read bedtime stories to our sons, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for work. Unless I'd never really known him at all. That evening, while Michael argued with Claire over the phone in the bedroom and Dale dozed on the couch, I noticed something odd. The agent posted by the front door, a young woman named Torres, kept checking her phone. Not casually, anxiously. And when Garrett stepped outside to take a call, I saw Torres follow him. Through the window, I watched them have a heated conversation. Garrett's body language was aggressive, territorial. Torres looked defensive. They were arguing about us. About the case. When Garrett returned, his expression was carefully neutral. But I'd spent 40 years reading people's faces at dinner parties and client meetings. Something had changed. "Mrs. Golding, I need to ask you some questions about your husband's partnership with Edward Hutchins." He sat across from me at the kitchen table, pulled out his notebook. "How much did you know about their business arrangement?" I knew they were partners, equal shares in the firm. Thomas handled most of the trial work. Edward managed estates and contracts. "Did you know Edward was married before? That his first wife died in a car accident in 1995? The question seemed to come from nowhere. "Yes, I knew. It was tragic. She was only 32. Garrett's pen stilled on the page. Did your husband ever mention anything unusual about that accident? A cold feeling spread through my chest. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking if Thomas ever suggested the accident might not have been— He chose his words carefully. Accidental. Absolutely not. But even as I said it, I remembered something. A conversation, years ago, after a firm dinner. Thomas and I driving home and him saying something odd about Edward. He's trapped now. No way out. I'd assumed he meant trapped by grief, by loss. What if he'd meant something else entirely? Marshall Garrett, I said slowly. What did you find in those files about Edward's wife? He closed the notebook. That's part of an ongoing investigation. I can't— You think my husband knew something about her death? You think he used it to control Edward? The pieces were assembling themselves in my mind with terrible clarity. All these years, Edward wasn't just Thomas's partner. He was— What? Another victim? Another person Thomas had leverage over? I think your husband was very good at collecting insurance policies, Garrett said quietly. Information he could use if he ever needed leverage. And I think Edward Hutchins finally decided he'd had enough. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Ask Garrett about his brother. I showed him the screen. Watched the color drain from his face. Who sent this? His voice was tight. The same number as before. What does it mean? What about your brother? Garrett stood abruptly, walked to the window. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. My brother committed suicide 8 years ago. He was a banker in Richmond. Got caught up in some kind of financial scandal, lost everything. He turned to face me. Your husband's firm handled the investigation. The implications hung in the air between us. You think, Thomas? I think my brother's name was in one of those files, Garrett said. And I think whatever information your husband had drove James to put a gun in his mouth. The room tilted. This wasn't just about investigating Thomas's crimes. This was personal. Garrett had a stake in whatever we uncovered. Does your supervisor know? I asked carefully. Know what? That I requested this assignment? That I've been waiting 8 years to find out what your husband knew about my brother's death? His laugh was bitter. I'm the best person for this case, Mrs. Golding. Because I understand exactly what kind of man Thomas Golding was. Then you're compromised. Michael stood in the hallway, his face hard. You can't investigate objectively. You need to remove yourself. I need to find Edward Hutchins before he disappears with evidence that could answer 8 years of questions. Garrett shot back. And I need to figure out who else wants those files badly enough to threaten your family. So unless you want to file a formal complaint and wait for a new team to get up to speed, which could take weeks, I suggest we continue working together. Michael looked at me. I saw the calculation in his eyes. The lawyer's assessment of risk versus reward. We continue, I said quietly. But Marshall Garrett, you need to be honest with us. All of us. No more secrets. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Then here's the truth. We found something else in the files. A list of dates and locations. Meeting spots, we think? Where your husband collected payments. The last entry is dated 3 weeks before he died. The location is the old Riverside Mill, out past Route 29. That's abandoned, Dale said. Has been for years. Exactly. Private. No witnesses. Garrett pulled out his phone, showed us a photograph. We sent a team there this afternoon. Found this in the main building. The image showed a room set up like an office. Desk, filing cabinet, laptop computer. But everything was destroyed. Papers scattered, drawers ripped out. The laptop smashed. Someone got there first, I breathed. 2 days ago, by the look of it. Right around the time Edward Hutchins disappeared. Garrett swiped to another photo. We also found this. A message spray-painted on the wall in red. The doctor knows. What doctor? Michael demanded. That's what we need to find out. Garrett's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, his voice dropping to a murmur. I pulled out my own phone, opened the text message again. Ask Garrett about his brother. Someone wanted me to know the marshal was compromised. Someone wanted to create distrust, division. But why? Unless they needed us fighting among ourselves instead of looking too closely at the evidence. I stood, walked to the kitchen window. The safe house backed onto a wooded area, dark now as evening settled in. Movement caught my eye. A figure, just at the tree line, too far to make out details but standing there, watching. "Marshall," I called quietly. "We have company." Garrett was at my side in seconds, weapon drawn. He radioed Torres. "Perimeter breach, northeast corner. Move in but don't engage until—" The lights went out. Complete darkness. Michael swore. Dale called for me. Garrett was shouting orders into his radio. And then I heard it. The soft click of the back door opening. Someone was inside. "Everyone down!" Garrett's voice cut through the chaos. "Federal agents! Identify yourself!" Silence. Then footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, crossing the kitchen tile. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding, and when my eyes adjusted, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, wearing one of the marshal's jackets and holding Torres's access badge as if he belonged there. A man in his 60s, well-dressed, familiar. It took me a moment to place him because he was so utterly out of context. Dr. Richard Brennan, our family physician for 20 years. "Hello, Constance," he said calmly, as if he'd just arrived for Sunday dinner. "I think it's time we talked about what your husband really knew." Garrett's gun was trained on him. "Don't move. Hands where I can see them." Dr. Brennan raised his hands slowly, but his expression remained placid. "Marshall Garrett, I wondered when we'd meet. Your brother spoke of you often, before the end." Garrett's hand trembled. "You knew James?" "I was his doctor. Treated his depression after the scandal. Prescribed the pills he used to, well, you know the rest." Brennan's smile was terrible. "Thomas documented all of it. Every prescription, every session, every moment of your brother's decline. He kept excellent records." "You son of a—" Garrett lunged forward, but Michael grabbed him, held him back. "Easy, Marshall," Brennan said. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because Constance needs to understand something important." He looked directly at me. "Your husband didn't start collecting secrets because he was greedy or cruel. He started because he was protecting someone. And when he died, that protection ended." "Protecting who?" I demanded. "You, Constance. Everything Thomas did, every file, every secret, every terrible choice. He did it to protect you." The words made no sense. "Protect me from what?" Brennan's expression softened with something like pity. "From the truth about your past. About who you really are." The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. "What are you talking about? Your maiden name was Constance Elizabeth Bradford, correct? Grew up in Charlottesville, only child of Robert and Eleanor Bradford?" "Yes," I whispered, though suddenly I wasn't sure of anything. "Except that's not true. Any of it." Brennan pulled a folder from his jacket. I recognized it instantly as one of Thomas's files. Thomas spent 30 years keeping this hidden, but now that he's gone, the people who wanted it buried have come looking, and they will hurt anyone who stands in their way. He tossed the file onto the kitchen table. In the flashlight beam, I saw my name on the tab. My file. Thomas had kept a file on me. "Open it," Brennan said. "Before anyone else dies, you need to know what your husband gave up everything to protect." My hands shook as I reached for the folder. Michael and Dale crowded close. Garrett kept his weapon trained on Brennan, but his eyes were on the file too. I opened it. The first document was a birth certificate. Not mine. I'd seen mine hundreds of times. This one listed a different name. Margot Hines. Born June 3rd, 1962, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My birthday. My birth date. But not my name. "I don't understand," I breathed. "Keep reading," Brennan said softly. Newspaper clippings, dated 1968. A house fire in Pittsburgh. 2 deaths. Robert and Diane Keller. 1 survivor, their 6-year-old daughter Margot. Photographs of a little girl with dark hair and solemn eyes. She looked familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. She looked like me. "No," I said. It's a mistake. My parents were Robert and Eleanor Bradford. I grew up in Charlottesville. You remember what you were told to remember," Brennan interrupted. "What the Bradfords raised you to believe. They adopted you after the fire, Constance. Changed your name, your history, your entire identity. And they did it because someone very powerful wanted you to disappear. Who? Dale demanded. Why would anyone? Because of what your mother witnessed the night of that fire. Brennan's voice was grim. Because she saw who said it. Because at 6 years old, Constance, or Margot, was the only witness to a double murder. The room spun. I gripped the table edge, fought to breathe. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be true. But the photographs, the birth certificate, the dates that lined up perfectly with my life, reimagined as someone else's story. Thomas found out, I whispered. Somehow he discovered who I really was. When you were engaged, Brennan confirmed. He was doing background research for the wedding announcement, found a discrepancy in your adoption records, started digging. And what he found, he shook his head. The people who killed your birth parents, who wanted you silenced, they were connected, powerful. Thomas realized that if anyone discovered you were still alive, still a potential witness, they'd come after her. Michael finished, his voice hollow. So he built a protection racket, Garrett said slowly. Collected secrets, created leverage, made himself untouchable. All to keep people from looking too closely at his wife's past. For 40 years, Brennan confirmed. He blackmailed, manipulated, and destroyed lives, all to keep Constance safe. And it worked, until Edward Hutchins realized what the files really were. Until he understood that with Thomas gone, there was no one to maintain the balance. No one to keep the predators at bay. That's why he ran, I breathed. He knew they'd come looking. And they have. Brennan's expression turned urgent. Constance, the person who set that fire, who killed your parents, they're still alive, still powerful, and they know you found the files. They know you're looking for answers. Who is it? I demanded. Tell me who I'm afraid of. I can't. Thomas never told me the name. It was his final insurance policy. But it's someone in this town. Someone you know. Someone who's been watching you for 40 years, waiting to see if you'd ever remember. The lights flickered back on. Torres stumbled through the back door, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. Breach! Someone hit me. More agents poured in, weapons drawn. In the confusion, I saw Brennan move toward the door. Wait! I grabbed his arm. The files. Do they say who? Thomas hid the final answer somewhere only you would find it, Brennan said urgently. He told me once if anything happened to him that you'd figure it out, that you were smarter than anyone gave you credit for. Then he was gone, melting into the chaos as agents secured the safe house. I stood there, holding a file that proved my entire life was a lie, that the parents I'd mourned, the childhood I remembered, the person I thought I was, none of it was real. I was Margot Hines, witness to a murder, target of a killer who'd waited 4 decades to finish the job. And somewhere in the evidence Thomas had spent a lifetime collecting, hidden in the secrets he'd protected so fiercely, was the answer to who wanted me dead. I just had to find it before they found me. They moved us to a new location before dawn, a hotel near the Federal Building in Richmond, with agents stationed on our floor and in the lobby. Garrett had been replaced by a senior marshal named Patricia Cordova, a stern woman in her 50s who made it clear she didn't appreciate the complications we'd brought to her jurisdiction. Dr. Brennan's disappearance is now part of the investigation, she informed us over coffee in her makeshift command center, a hotel suite converted into an operations hub. We've issued a warrant, but he seems to have vanished as thoroughly as Edward Hutchins. They're working together, I said. It was the only explanation that made sense. Cordova's expression suggested she'd reached the same conclusion. What we need to understand is why. What's their endgame? I'd spent the sleepless night piecing together fragments of memory, testing them against this new reality. Margot Hines. The name felt foreign on my tongue, like trying on someone else's clothes. But there were moments, flashes of things I'd always attributed to childhood dreams, that suddenly took on new meaning. A house with blue shutters, the smell of smoke, a woman's scream, running through darkness while someone called a name that wasn't Constance. Margot. They'd been calling for Margot. Mom, you need to rest. Dale sat beside me on the hotel room couch, his face creased with worry. You haven't slept. I can't. I showed him the file again, the birth certificate that proved I was someone else. Dale, if this is true, if I witnessed a murder, I might remember something. Something that could identify who did it. Or you might be traumatized all over again, he said gently. Let the professionals handle this. But the professionals had let Dr. Brennan walk into a federal safe house and walk back out. They'd lost Edward Hutchins and $2.3 million. They were searching for answers in Thomas's files while the real answer was locked somewhere in my fractured memory. Michael paced by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He'd been on calls all morning, to Claire, to his office, to the family attorney. When he finally hung up, his expression was grim. We have a problem, a big one. Cordova looked up from her laptop. What kind of problem? Claire's father is Lawrence Brennan, the former mayor, the one who has a file in Dad's collection. Michael's jaw tightened. She just informed me that her family is filing a lawsuit against Mom for defamation and emotional distress. They're claiming Dad's files contain false information intended to damage her father's reputation. That's ridiculous, Dale said. They can't sue Mom for something Dad did. They can and they are. And Claire's standing with them. Michael's voice cracked slightly. She wants me to choose. Her family or mine. The betrayal in his eyes cut deeper than any physical wound. His wife, the woman he'd built a life with, was turning this investigation into a weapon against us. Lawrence Brennan, I said slowly, pulling the name from memory. He was mayor from 2008 to 2014. Thomas and I went to several functions at his house. He has a daughter about your age, Michael, and a son. Richard, Cordova finished, looking up from her computer. Dr. Richard Brennan, who just happens to be your family physician and the person who broke into the safe house last night. The connections assembled themselves like a spider's web. Lawrence Brennan, compromised by whatever Thomas had discovered. His son Richard, somehow involved in covering up the truth about my identity. Both of them connected to a murder 40 years old. We need to see Lawrence Brennan's file, I said. Cordova shook her head. It's evidence in a federal investigation. I can't just... My family is being sued. My son's marriage is falling apart. Someone is trying to kill me. I stood, fought to keep my voice steady. I have a right to know what's in that file. After a long moment, Cordova pulled out her phone, made a call. 10 minutes later, an agent arrived with a copy of Lawrence Brennan's file. It was thicker than most of the others. Inside were photographs dating back to the 1980s, financial records, copies of sealed court documents. But it was the newspaper clipping that made my blood run cold. Pittsburgh Gazette, October 15, 1968. Investigation continues in Keller House fire. The Brennan family lived in Pittsburgh, I whispered. In 1968. Cordova was already typing, pulling up records. Lawrence Brennan, born 1959 in Pittsburgh. Family moved to Virginia in 1969, 1 year after the Keller fire. She looked up. His father was a fire inspector. I finished, the memory surfacing like something from deep water. I remember. There was a man who came to our house, the Keller's house. He wore a uniform. He argued with my father about something. The fragments were assembling into a picture I didn't want to see. A fire inspector's family, a convenient house fire, a 6-year-old witness who disappeared into the foster system, renamed, relocated, her entire identity erased. Brennan's father was dirty, Cordova said, reading from her screen. Thomas's file documents, payoffs, evidence tampering, a pattern of declaring arson cases as accidental when paid enough. He died in 1995, but his son inherited his secrets, I said. And when Lawrence ran for mayor, Thomas had everything he needed to control him. Why would your husband protect the man whose father helped cover up your parents' murder? Dale asked. It was the question I'd been avoiding, but the answer was becoming clear. Because Thomas didn't just want justice. He wanted insurance. He wanted to make sure the people involved had too much to lose by coming after me. Michael sank into a chair, his face ashen. Dad built an entire criminal empire just to keep you safe, and now it's falling apart. Everyone he controlled, everyone who had something to lose, they're all scrambling to protect themselves. By eliminating the witness, Cordova said quietly. By eliminating you. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Your sons will pay for your husband's sins. Starting with Michael's reputation. Before I could show it to Cordova, Michael's phone rang. He answered, listened, and went pale. That was my senior partner. Someone leaked confidential client information to the press. Information that was on my laptop. They're saying I violated attorney-client privilege. His voice was hollow. They're opening an ethics investigation. I could be disbarred. It's escalating, Cordova said. They're not just threatening anymore. They're actively destroying your family's credibility, your resources, your ability to fight back. Dale's phone buzzed next. He read the message, and I watched the color drain from his face. The school board. They're putting me on administrative leave, pending an investigation into... He stopped, showed me the screen. Allegations of inappropriate conduct with students. That's insane, I said. Dale, you're the most ethical teacher. Doesn't matter. His hands shook. Once an accusation like this is made, it follows you forever, even if it's proven false. They were taking my sons down systematically, destroying their careers, their reputations, their lives. And they were doing it because I dared to look for the truth. We need to go public, Michael said suddenly. Release the files, all of them. If everyone's secrets are exposed, then everyone has motive to silence you permanently, Cordova interrupted. No, we need to identify who's orchestrating this and build a case that will stand up in court. While my family is destroyed, Michael's voice rose. While my marriage falls apart and my brother loses his career, while we keep you alive, Cordova shot back. That's the priority. But I was thinking about something Dr. Brennan had said. Thomas hid the final answer somewhere only you would find it. The VHS tapes. They were still in my overnight bag, confiscated as evidence but logged and stored. I stood, interrupting the argument. Marshal Cordova, I need access to evidence. 3 VHS tapes from my husband's safe. She frowned. Why? Because my husband documented everything. If there's an answer, it might be on those tapes. 20 minutes later, we were in a federal building conference room with a VCR that looked like it belonged in a museum. Cordova, 2 other agents, my sons and I gathered around as I inserted the first tape. The one dated September 15th, 1987. The day we'd moved into our house. The screen flickered to life. Thomas appeared, younger, his hair not yet gray. He sat in what I recognized as his office. Before the false wall, before the hidden room. Constance, his recorded voice said, if you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you've found the room, which means the protection I built has failed. My throat tightened. Dale gripped my hand. I want you to know that everything I did for you. When I discovered who you really were, what you'd witnessed. Thomas paused, collected himself. I had a choice. Tell you the truth and watch you live in fear, or keep the secret and make sure no one could ever hurt you. He chose the lie, Michael whispered. I chose you, Thomas's recorded voice continued, as if answering. And I'd make the same choice again. But if you're watching this, the situation has changed. The people involved have made a move, so you need to know everything. The camera angle shifted. Thomas held up a photograph. I recognized it immediately as one from my file. The Keller house, before the fire. Your father, Robert Keller, was an accountant. He discovered fraud at his firm, massive embezzlement, money laundering, connections to organized crime. He documented everything, planned to go to the authorities. Thomas's expression was grave. They killed him before he could, made it look like an accident, a gas leak, a house fire. But you survived, Margot. You ran. The name sent chills through me. Margot. I'd been Margot. The man who ordered the hit was named Vincent Castellano, mid-level crime boss, Pittsburgh operation. He's dead now. Died in prison in 1994. But his organization survived. And the person who actually set the fire, who made sure your parents didn't escape. Thomas leaned closer to the camera. That was never proven. The investigation was compromised by the Brennan family's fire inspector father. The evidence was destroyed. Then how do we find them? I asked the screen, knowing he couldn't answer. But Thomas smiled, as if he'd anticipated my question. I spent 30 years following the money. Castellano's organization had connections in Virginia. When his empire fell, his people scattered. Some went legitimate, changed names, built new lives, got into politics, business, medicine. Medicine. I thought of Dr. Richard Brennan, of his father Lawrence. I documented everyone with connections to the original crime, Thomas continued. Everyone who might have been involved. It's all in the files. But the person who actually killed your parents, who tried to kill you, I never found definitive proof until 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks before he died. I received a call, anonymous. Someone who claimed to know what happened that night. They wanted to meet, to make a deal. They said they had evidence, and they were willing to trade it for immunity from the leverage I had over them. It was a trap, Cordova said quietly. I went to the meeting, Thomas said on screen, at the old Riverside Mill, and I recorded everything. If you're watching this tape, Constance, you need to find the others. They're hidden in places that mean something to us. Places only you would think to look. The screen went black. We sat in silence. Finally, Dale spoke. Dad was trying to make a deal with his own blackmail victim, someone he had leverage over, someone who knew about the Keller murders, someone who killed him for it, Michael added. I thought about the recording, the meeting at Riverside Mill, the destroyed office we'd found there. Thomas made a recording of that meeting, I said. It would be evidence of who killed my parents, maybe even evidence of who killed him. And it's on one of the other tapes, Cordova realized, or hidden somewhere the killer hasn't found yet. My phone buzzed. The unknown number again. Found the mill. Found the office. Looking for the house next. Hope your sons survived the search. The threat was clear. They were going to my house. Where Morgan's renovation crew had torn open walls, exposed the hidden room, disturbed evidence. Where they might find whatever Thomas had hidden there. We need to get back to Millbrook Falls, I said, standing. Now. Absolutely not, Cordova said. It's too dangerous. We'll send a team. They won't know what to look for. Thomas said he hid things in places that meant something to us. To our marriage. Our life together. I grabbed my coat. I'm the only one who can find it. Then I'm coming with you, Michael said. Me too, Dale added. Cordova looked ready to argue, then sighed. Fine. But we do this my way. Full tactical team, armored vehicles, and at the first sign of trouble, we pull out. Agreed? I nodded, but I was already thinking ahead. Thomas had left me a trail. Clues hidden in our shared history. In the life we'd built together. He'd trusted that I would be smart enough, observant enough, to find what he'd left behind. Everyone else saw me as a 63-year-old widow. Fragile, confused, in need of protection. Thomas had known better. He'd spent 40 years watching me navigate social politics, manage a household, raise 2 intelligent sons. He'd seen the steel beneath the polite exterior. And he'd bet everything. His reputation, his life's work, the truth about my past, that I would be able to finish what he'd started. As we prepared to return to Millbrook Falls, to walk back into danger, I felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there, yes, but underneath it was something stronger. Determination. Someone had killed my birth parents. Someone had spent 40 years trying to keep me silent. Someone had murdered my husband to protect their secrets, and they'd just threatened my sons. That was their mistake. Because a mother protecting her children is the most dangerous force in the world. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. We arrived at my house just after sunset. A convoy of federal vehicles rolling up Hawthorne Drive like an invading army. The neighbors' curtains twitched. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching with undisguised curiosity. The house looked violated in the fading light. Yellow police tape still hung across the door from the brick incident. Morgan's truck was gone, but his equipment remained scattered across the lawn. Sawhorses, tarps, a stack of drywall sheets growing damp in the evening dew. Clear the perimeter first, Cordova ordered her team. 6 agents fanned out, checking the backyard, the garage, the shadowed spaces between houses where threats might hide. I stood on the sidewalk, keys clutched in my hand, and tried to think like Thomas. Where would he hide something precious? Something that could only be found by someone who knew our history, our private moments. "Mom," Dale said quietly. "The tree." I turned to look at him. He was staring at the old oak in the backyard, barely visible in the gathering darkness. "What about it? Remember when I was 10? I built that treehouse and Dad helped me. We spent an entire weekend up there." Dale's eyes met mine. He made me promise never to tear it down. Said it was important to keep some things exactly as they were built. My heart began to race. The treehouse. We'd kept it maintained even after the boys grew up, even though it served no purpose. Thomas had insisted on replacing boards when they rotted, keeping the structure sound. "Cordova," I called. "We need to check the treehouse." She looked skeptical but nodded. "Ramirez, Santos, you're with Mrs. Golding. Everyone else, maintain your positions." The backyard was a minefield of shadows. The treehouse perched in the oak's lower branches, accessible by a ladder Thomas had built with his own hands. Ramirez went up first, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "It's clear," he called down. "Just some old furniture and— Wait, there's something here." My hands shook on the ladder rungs as I climbed. The treehouse was exactly as I remembered. Small platform, weathered walls, the initials DW and MW carved into the support beam, but Ramirez was pointing to the corner, where a loose board had been pried up. Beneath it was a metal box. I lifted it out with trembling hands. The lock was simple, designed to keep out curious children, not determined adults. I broke it open with a rock. Inside was another VHS tape, labeled with a date 3 weeks before Thomas died, and underneath it, a file folder marked Final Evidence. "We need to watch this," I said. Now. Back in the house with agents posted at every entrance, we gathered again around the ancient VCR. Michael and Dale flanked me on the couch. Cordova stood behind us, her hand never far from her weapon. I inserted the tape. The image was grainy, shot from a fixed camera position. The setting was the Riverside Mill office. I recognized the desk, the filing cabinet, before they'd been destroyed. Thomas sat in frame, facing the camera. "This is being recorded on October 8th, he said, his voice steady despite the pallor of his skin. "I'm meeting with someone who claims to have information about the Keller murders. Someone I've maintained leverage over for 15 years. The door in the background opened. A figure entered, face initially obscured by shadow. Then they moved into the light. I gasped. Rita Vance, the high school principal, Dale's boss. "Thank you for coming," Thomas said on screen. "Let's get this over with." Patricia's voice was tight with tension. She sat across from him, her face hard. "You said you'd destroy the files if I told you what I know about Pittsburgh. If the information is genuine, yes. I'll destroy everything I have on your embezzlement from the school district." Dale made a strangled sound beside me. "She was stealing from the school? For 5 years," Thomas continued on screen. "But that's not why we're here. You grew up in Pittsburgh. Your father worked for Vincent Castellano's organization." Patricia's jaw tightened. "He was a driver, low level. He got out before the arrests. But not before he participated in certain operations, including the Keller fire." The room seemed to freeze. On screen, Patricia went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Your father drove the car that night. He was the getaway driver for the person who set the fire. And you know who that person was because your father told you. On his deathbed 5 years ago, he confessed." Patricia's hands clenched into fists. "You can't prove any of this. I can prove your father's connection to Castellano. I can prove he was in Pittsburgh the night of the fire. And I can prove that you've been paying money to someone for 15 years. Someone you're terrified of. Someone you're protecting." Thomas leaned forward. "Tell me who killed the Kellers, Patricia. Tell me who tried to kill my wife when she was 6 years old." The silence stretched. Then Patricia laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You don't understand. If I tell you, they'll kill me. They've killed before. They killed Eddie Hutchins 2 days ago." My blood ran cold. Eddie Hutchins, Edward's son. He'd been found dead last week. An apparent suicide. Edward's son knew? Cordova breathed. On screen, Thomas had gone pale. Eddie is dead. They made it look like an overdose, but he knew too much. His father told him everything before he ran, and now they're cleaning up loose ends. Patricia stood, began to pace. You want a name? Fine, but it won't save you, won't save any of us. She moved closer to the camera, her face filling the frame. The person who set the Keller fire was Brennan, but not Lawrence, his older brother James. He was 17, working for Castellano's crew, trying to prove himself. He set the fire. He made sure the Kellers couldn't escape. And then he panicked because there was a witness. A little girl who ran. My chest constricted. I couldn't breathe. James Brennan spent 40 years wondering if that little girl would remember, if she'd recognize him. When his father got the fire inspector job in Virginia and helped cover it up, when Lawrence got into politics, they all had something to lose if the truth came out. Patricia's eyes glistened. But James had the most to lose, because he didn't just kill the Kellers. He liked it, and he kept doing it. What do you mean? Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. James Brennan has killed 6 people over the past 40 years, made them all look like accidents, natural causes. Anyone who got too close to the truth, anyone who might expose him. She looked directly into the camera. And now he knows about you, about your wife, about these files. The tape went silent. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Where is James Brennan now? Patricia smiled, but it was terrible. That's the thing, Thomas. You already know him. You've known him for 20 years. You just never realized who he really was. The screen went black. We sat in stunned silence. Then Cordova was on her phone, barking orders. I need everything we have on James Brennan. Family records, aliases, employment history. He changed his identity, I said numbly. Just like I did. He became someone else. Someone local, Michael said. Someone we know. Dale was staring at nothing, his face ashen. Principal Vance has been dead for 3 days. They found her Monday morning. Carbon monoxide poisoning in her garage. Another accident, Cordova said grimly. Just like Eddie Hutchins. Just like Thomas, I finished. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. His heart attack. What if it wasn't natural? Cordova's expression confirmed she'd been thinking the same thing. We need to find James Brennan. Now. Before, the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. Cordova signaled her agents, weapons drawn. Through the window, I could see a figure on the porch. Alone. Unarmed, as far as I could tell. Mrs. Golding? A familiar voice called through the door. It's Sheriff Cook. The dispatcher told me the feds were back at your house, and I figured I'd better come check on you. Raymond Cook. Retired sheriff. Friend of 30 years. The man who'd comforted me at Thomas's funeral. Who'd promised to look out for me. The man who had a file in Thomas's hidden room. Cordova moved to the door, looked through the peephole. He's alone. No visible weapons. Don't open it, I said suddenly. Something was wrong. Something about the voice, the timing, the way he'd appeared exactly when we'd discovered the truth. But Cordova was already opening the door, her weapon trained on Cook. Sheriff, I'm going to need you to show me some identification. Raymond Cook stepped into the light. He looked exactly as he always had. Silver hair, weathered face, kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He raised his hand slowly. Easy now, Marshal. I'm just here as a concerned citizen. Heard the commotion, wanted to make sure Constance was safe. How did you know I was here? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He looked at me, and something in his expression shifted. The kindness faded, replaced by something colder. Because I've been watching, waiting. 40 years is a long time to wonder if someone will remember. The world tilted. James, I breathed. He smiled then, and it transformed his face into something monstrous. Hello, Margot. Took you long enough. Cordova's weapon came up, but Cook was faster than a man his age should be. He grabbed her wrist, twisted, and suddenly he had her gun. Agents poured in from the backyard. but Cook had already put the weapon to my head. Everyone stops or Constance dies. Right here, right now, just like her parents. The agents froze. Michael and Dale started to move, but I shook my head slightly. I could feel the cold metal against my temple, smell the sweat and desperation rolling off the man I'd called friend for 3 decades. The man who'd killed my parents, who'd tried to kill me, who'd murdered my husband. You set the fire, I said quietly. You were just a boy, old enough to understand what happened to snitches. His voice was rough. Your father was going to destroy everything. Castellano's whole operation. I did what needed to be done. And then you became a cop. Changed your name. Built a whole new life. Built a perfect life. Until your husband started digging. Until he figured out who I really was. Cook's grip tightened. I tried to warn him. Tried to make a deal. But he wouldn't let it go. So I made his heart stop. Easy enough when you know what you're doing. You murdered him, Michael said, his voice breaking. I eliminated a threat. Just like I eliminated Rita Vance when she talked. Just like I eliminated Eddie Hutchins when he tried to blackmail me. Cook pulled me backward toward the door. And now I eliminate the last loose end. The witness who's haunted me for 40 years. You won't make it out of here, Cordova said. There are 6 agents surrounding this house. Then I guess we'll see how many people die tonight. Cook's hand was steady, his voice calm. This wasn't panic. This was a man who'd killed before and knew exactly what he was doing. But he'd made a mistake. He assumed I was the same terrified 6-year-old who'd run from a burning house. He assumed I was helpless, dependent on others to save me. He didn't know what I'd learned in 40 years of watching, listening, preparing for a threat I couldn't name but always felt lurking. He didn't know about the letter opener in my cardigan pocket, the one Thomas had given me for our anniversary, sharp as a knife, that I'd been carrying since we found the hidden room. Just in case. You're right, I said quietly. You've been very careful, very smart. You became the sheriff, the one person who could control investigations, cover up evidence, protect yourself. Exactly. He sounded almost proud. But you made one mistake. What's that, Margot? I drove the letter opener backward into his thigh, hard as I could. He screamed, his grip loosening for just a second. I dropped, rolled away, and Cordova was on him before he could recover. Agents swarmed, weapons drawn, and Raymond Cook, James Brennan, was on the ground, bleeding and cursing and finally caught. I sat on my living room floor, shaking, while chaos erupted around me. Michael and Dale were beside me in an instant, their arms around me, their voices reassuring me that it was over, that I was safe, but I couldn't stop staring at the man on the floor, the monster who'd stolen my parents, my childhood, my husband, who'd hidden behind a badge and a friendly smile while destroying lives. What was the mistake? Cook gasped out through his pain, looking at me with hatred and something almost like respect. What mistake did I make? I met his eyes steadily. You assumed that being old meant being weak. You assumed I'd be easy to control, easy to kill. I stood, with my son's help, and looked down at the man who'd terrorized me without my even knowing it. But I've spent 63 years surviving, learning, watching, preparing. I smiled then, cold and sharp. And Thomas spent 40 years teaching me exactly how dangerous underestimated people can be. As the agents hauled Cook away, as paramedics checked my trembling hands and Cordova congratulated me on my quick thinking, I felt something break open inside me. Margot Hines had watched her parents die. Constance Golding had lived a lie. But the woman standing in this house, surrounded by evidence of secrets and violence and 40 years of hidden truth, she was someone new. Someone forged by both identities, strengthened by both lives. Someone who'd just taken down a killer with nothing but intelligence, patience, and a letter opener. Thomas had been right. I was strong enough to finish what he started, and I wasn't done yet. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of depositions, interviews, and revelations that rippled through Millbrook Falls like aftershocks from an earthquake. James Brennan, the man we'd known as Sheriff Raymond Cook, confessed to everything, not out of remorse, but with the clinical detachment of someone discussing a particularly complex chess game. 5 murders over 40 years, each one carefully staged to look natural. My parents, Thomas, Rita Vance, Eddie Hutchins, and a man named Gregory Walsh in 1998, who'd been investigating cold cases and gotten too close to the truth about the Keller fire. He'd lived among us for 3 decades, attended church services, coached Little League, served as sheriff with distinction, his corrupt father having buried his juvenile record so completely that no background check ever connected him to the boy who'd set that fire. The media descended on our small town like locusts. Headlines screamed about the killer sheriff and the Black Widow attorney. They got half the story wrong, but the truth was strange enough that I couldn't entirely blame them. I sat in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 1 month after the renovation crew had found the hidden room, and watched the sunrise paint the oak tree gold. The treehouse was still there, but I'd decided to take it down. Some memories didn't need to be preserved. "Mom?" Dale appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He'd been staying with me since the arrest, unwilling to leave me alone despite my protests. "How are you feeling?" "Like myself," I said, for the first time in a long time. It was true. The woman I'd been, Constance Golding, devoted wife, doting mother, pillar of the community, had been real, but incomplete. Now, knowing the truth about Margot Hines, about the trauma buried beneath 40 years of carefully constructed identity, I felt more whole than I had in decades. Broken and mended, scarred, but stronger for it. Dale sat across from me, and I saw the question in his eyes, the one he'd been afraid to ask. "Do you remember it now? The fire?" I did. The memories had returned in fragments over the past weeks, pieces of that night reassembling themselves like a puzzle. I remember my mother singing while she made dinner, my father at the kitchen table with papers spread out, worried about something, then the smell of smoke, the heat, my mother screaming for me to run. And Brennan? I remember a young man's face in the window, watching the house burn, smiling. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. I was too young to understand what I was seeing, but some part of me never forgot. That's why I never felt entirely safe, even in my own home. Why I always checked the locks twice, kept a weapon close, watched strangers too carefully. "You knew," Dale said softly. "On some level, you always knew. Perhaps. Or perhaps Thomas's 40 years of vigilance had taught me to be cautious. Either way, it had kept me alive." My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Heading over. We need to talk." He arrived 20 minutes later with Claire. That surprised me. They'd been separated since the lawsuit, living apart while lawyers negotiated the terms of what everyone assumed would be a divorce. But Claire's hand was in Michael's as they walked up the path, and her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. "Mrs. Golding," she said, her voice breaking, "I owe you an apology, a massive one." I invited them in, poured more coffee, and waited. "My father," Claire began, then stopped, collected herself. "When the files came out, when everything went public, I learned things. Things about him, about my family, that I never knew." Lawrence Brennan's file had been released as evidence. The public now knew about the payoffs, the corruption, the cover-up of the Keller fire investigation. He'd resigned from every board he sat on, retreated into his mansion, and refused to speak to the press. He used his position to help hide a murderer, Claire continued. "And when you and Michael were threatened, when your family was being destroyed, I stood with him. I chose protecting his reputation over protecting the people I should have cared about most." "You didn't know," I said gently. "I should have trusted you. Should have trusted Michael." She looked at my son with raw emotion. "Instead, I let my family manipulate me, use me as a weapon against you." Michael's jaw was tight, but he squeezed her hand. "We're working through it, with a therapist. It's going to take time, but we want to try," Claire added. "If you'll forgive me, if you'll let me try to make this right." I thought about it, about grudges and anger and the poison they created, about how Thomas had spent 40 years fighting threats, collecting leverage, living in a constant state of war. That path had cost him his life and nearly cost me mine. "You're forgiven," I said. Both of you. But Claire, you need to understand something. I met her eyes steadily. Your father made choices. He has to live with the consequences. You can love him and still hold him accountable. You can be his daughter without being his defender. She nodded, tears spilling over. I'm trying to learn that. After they left, closer than they'd been in months, hands linked as they walked to the car, Dale turned to me. That was generous. After what her family did. Holding on to anger would only hurt me, I said. Claire made a mistake. She's young. She deserves the chance to grow from it. What I didn't say was that I'd already exacted a different kind of justice. Lawrence Brennan's political career was over. His reputation destroyed. His son Richard had fled the country. Last I heard, he was in Costa Rica, beyond extradition for his role in helping James conceal his identity. The Brennan family empire had crumbled, and I hadn't had to lift a finger. The truth had done all the work. That afternoon, Marshal Cordova called. Thought you'd want to know. We found Edward Hutchins. My heart jumped. Where? Mexico. Living under an assumed name. He's agreed to return and testify in exchange for a plea deal. She paused. He wants to speak with you, Mrs. Golding. Says he owes you an explanation. The meeting was arranged for the following week, in a federal facility with Cordova present. Edward looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. Gaunt, haunted. His expensive suit replaced with prison orange. Constance, he said when they brought him in. I'm so sorry. For all of it. I studied the man who'd been Thomas's partner for 30 years, who'd sat at our dinner table, celebrated holidays with us, held my hand at the funeral while knowing he was about to run. Tell me why, I said simply. He sank into the chair across from me. Thomas and I started the files together. Back in the beginning, it was about protecting clients. We'd find information that could be used against them in custody disputes, business negotiations. We'd document it, prepare defenses. When did it change? Gradually. We'd discover something damaging, and the person would offer to pay us to keep it quiet. At first, we refused. But then, he rubbed his face. Thomas told me about your past, about the danger you were in, and suddenly all that potential leverage became a tool, a way to protect you, by blackmailing people, by making sure powerful people had too much to lose if anything happened to you. If James Brennan made a move, if anyone connected to the original crime tried to silence you, Thomas had insurance. Mutually assured destruction. It was twisted logic, but I understood it. Thomas had built an empire of secrets to protect one secret. Mine. Why did you run? I asked. Edward's hands trembled. When Thomas died, I thought it was natural. Heart attack. Tragic but expected given his stress levels. But then Eddie, my son, started asking questions. He'd always been curious about the firm, about Dad's work. He found some of the files, started piecing things together. His voice broke. James Brennan figured out that Eddie knew. He killed my boy, Constance. Made it look like an overdose. And I knew. I knew if I stayed, if I tried to fight, I'd be next. So I took the money, and I ran, leaving me to face the consequences. I thought... He looked away. I thought they'd leave you alone. You were the grieving widow, you didn't know anything. I thought I was the threat, not you. You were wrong. I was a coward. He met my eyes finally. Thomas spent 40 years being brave enough to protect you. I couldn't even manage 40 days. I'm sorry, Constance. For everything. I stood to leave, then paused. Edward, my husband built a criminal enterprise. He blackmailed innocent people, destroyed reputations, broke laws. He did it to protect me, but that doesn't make it right. I know. But he also kept me alive, kept our son safe, made sure that a 6-year-old girl who witnessed a murder got to grow up, have a family, build a life. I looked back at him. I can be grateful for that and still acknowledge the damage. Both things can be true. What are you going to do? He asked. With the files? With everything Thomas built? It was the question I'd been wrestling with for weeks. Thomas's hidden room contained evidence of crimes, secrets, sins, information that could destroy dozens of lives if it became public. I could turn it all over to the authorities. Let justice take its course, even if that justice was harsh and indiscriminate. Or I could do what Thomas never did: destroy it all. Burn the files, erase the secrets, give people the chance to move forward without the weight of past mistakes crushing them. I'm going to make it right, I said, in my own way. The following week, I made my decision. With Cordova's approval and under federal supervision, I went through every file in Thomas's collection, the ones containing evidence of actual crimes, fraud, embezzlement, abuse. I turned over to the appropriate authorities. People who'd hurt others would face consequences. But the rest, the affairs, the mistakes, the poor choices that had harmed no one but the people who made them, those I destroyed, burned them in the fireplace while Dale and Michael watched, the flames consuming 40 years of secrets. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked as the last file curled into ash. "I'm sure." I watched the fire, thought about Thomas sitting in his hidden room year after year, cataloging human weakness like a scientist studying specimens. "Your father thought he was protecting me by controlling everyone around us. But real protection isn't control. It's trust. It's believing that people can change, grow, make better choices. Even the ones who hurt you?" Dale asked. "Especially them. Holding on to those secrets would just make me into what Thomas became. Someone living in fear, using power to create safety that was really just an illusion." The renovation was completed in November. The hidden room was sealed up, returned to empty wall space. Morgan and his crew transformed Thomas's office into the library I'd originally envisioned. Warm wood shelves, comfortable chairs, large windows letting in the afternoon light. My grandchildren visited for Thanksgiving. Michael and Claire's 2 daughters, 7 and 9, explored the new space with delight. They didn't know what that room had been, what secrets it had held. They just saw a library, a place to read and dream and grow. "Grandma?" the youngest asked. "Why do you keep looking at that wall?" I smiled, pulled her into my lap. "Just remembering. Sometimes the things we hide end up being the things we most need to find." She wrinkled her nose. "That doesn't make sense." "No," I agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." But as I sat there, surrounded by family, in the house where I'd lived for 37 years, I understood something Thomas never had. You couldn't protect people by controlling them. You couldn't keep them safe by collecting weapons to use against potential threats. Real safety came from truth, from facing the darkness and not letting it consume you, from building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. I was 63 years old, a widow, a mother, a woman with 2 names and 2 histories, both of them true, both of them mine. I'd survived a fire at 6, survived a lie that lasted 40 years, survived the revelation that my entire life had been built on secrets and blood. And I'd done more than survive. I'd prevailed, not through violence or vengeance, but through patience, intelligence, and the quiet strength that everyone had underestimated. That evening, after the family had gone home, I stood in the new library and looked out at the oak tree. The treehouse was gone now, hauled away by Morgan's crew. In its place was empty space, room for new growth. I thought about Thomas's final tape, his last message to me. "I chose you," he'd said, "and I'd make the same choice again." He'd been wrong about many things, wrong about how to protect me, wrong about the cost of keeping secrets, wrong about the price he was willing to pay. But he'd been right about one thing. I was stronger than anyone knew, smart enough to find the truth, brave enough to face it, wise enough to know when to fight and when to let go. The house settled around me, familiar and strange all at once. My home, my sanctuary, no longer hiding secrets in its walls but holding memories instead. Good ones and bad ones, truth and lies, everything that made a life real. I picked up my phone, scrolled to the unknown number that had terrorized me with threats, and sent one final message. "You were wrong. The old know things the young have yet to learn. We survive because we're patient. We win because we're underestimated. Remember that." Then I blocked the number, deleted it, and moved on. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the Virginia sky in shades of amber and rose. A new season approaching, a new chapter beginning. And for the first time in 63 years, I knew exactly who I was. Not Margot Hines, victim of violence, not Constance Golding, keeper of secrets, but both, and neither, and something entirely my own, a survivor, a seeker of truth, a woman who'd faced her past and chosen her future. That was enough. That was everything. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.